we come down heavily on protests that are taking place in our own country, be it Tibetan protests, be it protests against China. I mean, we really do take into account the other country's sovereignty and respect and the image of the other country as well. Why is that not being done to India in Canada? I'm sure you've looked at those visuals yourself, sir.
Thank you. Let me put it this way. I saw the CBC, Canadian Broadcasting Corporation report.
Right.
Also saw the Toronto Star. As you said, there were about 100 protesters in Ottawa, 100 in Toronto, and 200 in Vancouver. The protests were peaceful. The RCMP had put up barricades so that the protesters could not get too close to the Indian High Commission or to the Consulate General. Secondly, I did not see any billboard threatening the Indian High Commissioner. There was one which said that he should be expelled, but no sort of physical violence. And also, there was one sort of a image of Prime Minister Modi, and some people were using their, footwear against it and all that. But what the point I want to make is that it was peaceful and the High Commission was not in any way attacked. Point number 2, you raised the question why Canada is permitting such protests. Well, the answer to it is that if it's a question of separatism, well, under Canadian law, the government cannot take any action for anyone propagating separatism, because you know that in Canada, they had themselves officially organized a referendum about Quebec, second time in 1995. So, separatism as such, we can talk about it, but if you resort to violence, that's a different matter. Now, what we should do is that we should always insist that Canada discharges its obligations under the Vienna Convention of 1961. And I want to take note of the fact that Canada has been rather slow in discharging its obligations under the Vienna Convention till now. But I also saw the other day that some of the billboards threatening the Indian officials on the Gurudwara in Saray,
Right.
where Nijjar was killed, they had been removed. That was yesterday or day before yesterday.
Okay, all right. But, slow in carrying out that action that is required and needed for everybody to see. Lieutenant General Kulkarni, we were just showing those visuals. A little poster over there in those protests said, "No justice for Sikhs in India." Now, is that not misrepresenting what's really happening in India?
Kabir, thank you. There's no denying the fact that there could be just about 100 protesters anywhere for that matter. And the very fact that all these protests are for things happening in India or would want them to happen in India. And therefore, irrespective of whatever the Canadian law may be, they should ensure that yes, freedom of speech, rule of law is therefore in Canada. You cannot protest, you cannot allow the use of your soil for protest against another country. That's the first thing. Second, the very fact that they are very limited in number and that the government over there is unable to do anything, and there may be huge 7.7 lakh population of the Sikhs in Canada. There may be just about a front of maybe even 500 people over there at 2-3 places are concerned. But the fact that the rest of them are fence sitters. If there are 100 protesters in front of an Indian embassy or Indian consulate there could well have been 500 other Sikhs saying that we don't agree with what is being said over here. It's totally, that kind of a protest is not coming, is indicative that they may be very silent, supporters. There may be just about 500 over there, the front of the few lakhs over there. So that is what. The third thing is that the Prime Minister of Canada himself, irrespective being a minority government, much that the 18 Sikhs are there in the parliament to support him, and therefore he remains as the prime minister. And it is not new. Even his father is since 85, Kanishka crash. You
Right.
know exactly what happened to Kanishka. Is indicated that the complete bot of the investigation is indicated very clearly that the Canadians do not allow. So this kind of a facade of rule of law, freedom of speech. What if you were to say that if you intend having Khalistan, we so have it in British Columbia? No problems. Go ahead and declare British Columbia. What if we were to get involved in the Quebec district? Would the Canadians like it? Would anybody like what for Canada if it was to be done in India? Nobody would like it. And therefore, when we are all part of so many summits, we are so many part of G20s, we are participating in the Indo-Pacific, we are having excellent relations with Canada. I think the
Right.
Canadians should have stepped out himself. Trudeau was for unfortunately for whatever the reason the aircraft didn't take off. He was in India for almost a day and a half. He could have discussed it. Telling the diplomats, what is it? What does that show? We don't want to talk to you. There is no diplomacy. There are no dialogue. Only expulsions. This means they have taken to the last resort first, clearly showing that they favor the Khalistani movement in Canada against India. And therefore, it is definitely not acceptable. And the Sikhs themselves, who feel strongly that their reputation is at stake in India or in Canada, must protest against this kind of a happening, which is happening maybe in America, it could be in Canada, it could be in UK, it could be in Australia, anywhere in the world. The Sikhs who feel strongly that their reputation is at stake by some of these anti-social elements who are bringing disrepute to the Sikhs all over the world must come out openly. And that itself would show. Otherwise, silent and being fence-sitters is indicative that they are with them. Yeah,
Absolutely, absolutely, Lieutenant General Kulkarni. Many thanks for those opening comments. Going across to Professor Asif Ramiz Daudi, for his opening remarks. Is this another case of, Canada's soft approach towards Khalistanis? Or is it another case of the West weaponizing human rights again? Because another set of those boards and, those placards that the protesters and demonstrators were holding read that, no human rights, no rights for Sikhs, no human rights for Sikhs. I mean, that was the essential theme of the protest.
Well, I agree with you. It's another case. And day after day, we can see how things are unfolding and how we can see that the anti-India sentiments are being encouraged. When you talk about another case, Major Kulkarni was rightly mentioning about the the Prime Minister Trudeau's father, Pierre Trudeau. So it goes, if you go back to the history, especially in 1982, he was the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister that time also turned down India's request to hand over a Sikh militant named Talvinder Singh. That was Talvinder Singh Panwa. So if you start from there, it's not a new story. It goes on, and now we can see how the Trudeau at present, he has been showcasing the poor diplomacy and poor governance by not controlling the agitation, the militants or terrorist activities there within the country. And on the other hand, when it comes to diplomacy, when it comes to passing the buck, he is coming up with some sort of narratives that India is somehow or the other engaged in this. Okay, look, if you cannot control things that is damaging and tarnishing India's nations, such a big democracy and having such a big name nowadays in the world platform.
Right.
If you fail to do so, we have to protest. We have to at least raise voice through the diplomatic channels, and we have been doing that. But see what has been happening, one after the other. Every day we can see how these things are being encouraged and how it's not being controlled properly. We can even see how they are planning to attack the Indian consulate or high commissions there. So this is a big concern. It should be the concern of the entire world, because we live in the global world and we are having such sort of diplomatic channels and diplomatic ways to be connected. If we do not stop these things now, we should be, the world community should also put pressure on Canadian government not to encourage these things. Okay, when you talk about the human rights, when you talk about the freedom of speech or expression, that's fine. It's your internal issue, and you can give freedom to each of your citizens to do anything. But when it comes to the complete damaging the country's image, and it's an open kind of scenario where everyone can understand that how these groups are constantly targeting India and encouraging anti-India sentiment. And if this is also a kind of freedom of expression, then I think they should know something more about this, because it's the duty of that country and the government there to control these things, to have better relations with the other countries. For example, if something of this sort keep happening in India, it's our responsibility at the same time to not to encourage these things even for Canada or for other countries. Now we have to see, we have been talking about this, and the media reports are saying many things about this, but when we talk about Five Eyes Alliance, let's see what exactly comes from there. And the allegations are serious, and Trudeau and the government, they must have the evidences, and we want to know what exactly is the scenario there. So it's not only just you just say things in the air and you just blame somebody and have some allegations and you go away from that and takes these kinds of actions. No, there should be some solid and credentials that can really have kind of evidence. Otherwise, these things are just mere allegations and face-saving things. And other countries like America and other, Five Eyes countries alliance, they are also trying to have the balancing approach. They know that they cannot go against India in such a, at present. At the same time, they are also trying to have the different kind of approach. They should come up with the fact that, India cannot do these kinds of things, and it's not something which we encourage. We believe in the rule of law, and we believe in the kind of proper diplomacy. And we have proper diplomats handling all these situations. But giving it a different scenario and giving it a different name and bringing some other things into this is not going to solve the issue.
All right. Well, thanks for those opening comments, Professor Dawoodi. I'm going to go back to Ambassador Fabian. Ambassador, how do you think the United States has played its card in this particular equation? We've had Jake Sullivan talk about it. After that, Anthony Blinken came out and spoke about it. Various reports doing the rounds that it was in fact Canada, the United States, beg your pardon, that lent the information on Nijjar's killing, also warned Canadians in India to safeguard themselves. I mean, the United States, we had an official visit, the Prime Minister was there. Joe Biden, when he came to India this time around, you saw different kind of bonhomie between the two leaders. People are saying it wasn't G20, it was G2. It was actually India and the US that came into that a pact of global leaders. How do you look at the US's role? Is it doing the right thing? Is it taking the right steps? Or is there something more than what meets the eye here?
Thank you. But before I answer that question, let me make two comments. I heard it being said, linking Prime Minister Trudeau's father with the Kanishka, attack on our flight. Now this is historically wrong. I was there in Canada at that time. I was the acting High Commissioner, and the Prime Minister at that time was not Trudeau's father. That was Harper. Okay? So we should be historically correct.
All right.
Second,
many thanks for that, sir.
Second, it was said that Canada should do whatever it can to make sure that India's image is not blemished. Well, I cannot subscribe to the proposition that it is Canada's duty to take care of India's image. Let us assume that proposition is correct. Then, our commentators have been saying that Canada is a haven for terrorists and drug smugglers and murderers. Now, does it embellish Canada's image? So, let us not talk about this responsibility to take care of the image of other countries. And we all know that at the time.
Oh, absolutely, Ambassador. The gloves are off, Ambassador. The gloves are off. We all know this is heading down an ugly road. We shouldn't, call each other's statements out like that. You're right.
Yeah. So, I mean, let's stop talking about Canada's responsibility to take care of India's image. Now, coming to your question, let us look at the chronology. On the 18th, Prime Minister of Canada made a statement in the House of Commons referring to, quote, credible allegations, unquote. Now, to my mind, to act on the basis of credible allegations when you have not completed the investigation, well, it does not make much sense. Okay? And then the foreign minister announced the expulsion of an Indian diplomat, again saying that if these allegations were to be proved right, again, something is wrong with the logic. Now, on the 19th, the United States came out with a statement expressing concern and that Canada should go ahead with the investigation and bring the perpetrators to justice. Well, the White House came under criticism from the American media immediately thereafter. And therefore, on the 20th, the American government changed its position and it said in so many words, in plain English, that India should cooperate. And much later, it turned out that President Biden had taken up this issue with Prime Minister Modi.
Absolutely.
Okay. So there is a change in American position. And as you said, part of the electronic evidence was provided by the United States. But at the same time, I do not expect America to put pressure on India beyond a point on this matter. However, I should add that it appears to me, and I could be wrong, it appears to me that Prime Minister Trudeau has more than some more stuff by way of evidence with him, and he might choose to come out with it at a point of time of his choice. And then how Washington will react, we do not know. And last, one more point. President Biden is very keen to meet with President Xi Jinping, and it is possible that they might have a meeting in November in an ASEAN-related summit. So let us see what might happen then.
All right.
If something happens and there is a sort of a rapprochement between China and the United States, again the geopolitical picture change. So we have to watch all these things very carefully.
Well, each for themselves, everybody on themselves, everybody has to look out for themselves. You're right, the geopolitical picture can change within a span of a minute. But you know what, Lieutenant General, let's go back to Canada. What's really happening on the ground in Canada? We're learning about a red corner notice by the Interpol against Karan Singh. We're also learning about the truth bombs. The NIA charge sheet has recently dropped about how Pakistan is involved in giving a safe haven to these people, from Rinda to Arsh Dalla, all of them, and the red corner notice as well. But on the ground in Canada, gang violence, the gangs of Khalistan, as people are now calling it, the Gangland violence, the actual weightage of the Gurudwara in local administration on the ground, the sway in politics, the ISI link, And of course, Canada being a safe haven for letting these extremists carry on with their peddling of soft terrorism. Can you throw some light for the viewers who are not well versed with the demographics of gangland violence in Canada? Can you help them out over here, Lieutenant General?
Kabir, at the very outset, we all say that the Canadian population, there are about 7.7 lakh Sikhs, about 2% of the population. And of course, British Columbia has the largest number. They're spread all over. And this is a sizable, and they have about 18 seats in the Canadian Parliament. And that's what gives the support to the Prime Minister Trudeau today. Having said that, even when we talk of the ISI linkages, let me tell you, when Bangladesh was created, at that point of time, it was Zulfikar Ali Bhutto who invited Jagjit Chauhan and said, here's the key for the Gurdwara over there. And come on, we are all for you and we support your Khalistan movement. Just not that, you can make this as the headquarter of Khalistan and start this thing. So you can well imagine, just because the Pakistanis at that point of time said they will bleed India with 1,000 cuts, the start had begun immediately after the 71 war, that is in 1973, when Jagjit Chauhan, who was invited by Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, right there. Okay, that's the first thing. Secondly, the Sikhs themselves over there, slowly and steadily over a period of time, you see all the Sikhs there in Canada, if you were to visit at any point of time, if there were about, say, 60% of them, I would say, if they were to be given a French test or an English test, they would all fail. Because they are only talking, today, Punjabi is the third largest number of people speaking Punjabi in Canada. English, French, and then Punjabi. So this kind of a groupism, and then of course everybody, the Gurudwaras become a place where they all meet, which is a very good thing. Sikhism is not meant for the thing that you're showing no justice. This is what seeks for justice. Who's this man, Panu? Who's this Panu operating for the United States? So you have all these. If the Five Eyes are working well, the Five Eyes must also be able to convey to the Canadian government, look, this is what is being said about. We are not just eavesdropping on the diplomats' conversations. We are eavesdropping everywhere to be able to find out whether the law and order situation in any part of their countries don't go bad. So it is, I think, incumbent for everybody to ensure, and especially today, if the purpose for which we are having G20, if for the purpose for which we are having Quad, if for the purpose that we are looking at opening of free Indo-Pacific and in cooperating with one another, in that context, if Canada takes the cover of the rule of law and the freedom of expression and freedom of speech, I think it's incorrect. You can. I'm not denying it. They are free to do what they want to do. It's their country. But the fact that if you are wanting to have good relations, you should be able to call. Now, if Nijjar, who's been shot dead and has been assassinated in a gang warfare, whatever be it so, should have been called for. He's a Canadian citizen. You know what he's doing there in Canada. He's not a plumber or anybody for that matter. He's a person. You call him up and tell him, look, don't do all this in here. We are not expecting you to be doing this. Do not use our soil. Why are relations bad with Pakistan? Again and again, we're telling Pakistan, do not allow the use of your soil for anti-India activities. Canada is doing just the same, allowing their soil to be used for anti-India activities. So is that fair? I don't think in any diplomatic parlance it would not be fair. We are also there as defense attaché. We would tell them, look, this is what has come to our light and we do not appreciate it. Would you mind controlling it? Would you mind doing it? Nothing. What is it? The Prime Minister of Canada is holding on because of the aircraft, and within no time, within a week, you expel a diplomat from what does that show? Therefore, you do not want good relations, or you are being funded, supported by the community for your own political power or to stay in power, whatever it be so. Your compulsions, their compulsions is this thing. But definitely, I think in the national interest, in the world interest, in wanting to be together, at least for the Indo-Pacific, we are having excellent relations. I don't think the Canadian government has definitely faulted, irrespective the rule of law or whatever it is. So, yeah, Kabir.
You're right, Lieutenant General. Back in the day, my father used to tell me, शरारत और बदतमीजी में बहुत थोड़ा सा फर्क होता है, and that line is blurring by the second in the case of India and Canada. But Professor Dawoodi, I wanted to ask you about the socio-economic problems on the ground? Because now Indian parents are really worried. They're worried about their children's safety. So much of money is being pumped by Indians into the Canadian economy, and much of that is has to do with education, and in the education sector. So many of our students are currently there, and their parents back at home think they might face discrimination. I'm going to come to that real quickly, but before that, ladies and gentlemen, the big show at 10 p.m. today, Duologue, TV9's MD and CEO Barun Das in a candid conversation with former Indian cricketer Mithali Raj.
What happened on 8th June 2022? Sportsperson like Sania Mirza or Saina Nehwal, they get written about more than the women's cricketer.
Journalist, for some reason, doesn't like an athlete. The narrative is very different.
Don't you think that a very, very focused approach should be there to create an ecosystem for producing champions?
There are also some girls, they say like, Didi, school में तो कोई नहीं है हमारा, हम खेलना चाहते हैं लेकिन boys team में लेते नहीं है.
In the huddle, do you tell your team members that let's go and fight? Or you tell them let's go and win?
The purpose of you being in the tournament, that you've come to win.
Duologue with Barun Das featuring Mithali Raj. World premiere on Connected TV. Tonight at 10. Only on Newsline Live. India's first and only digital exclusive English news stream for Connected TV. Supported by Alliance Broadband.
All right, then you can catch that exclusive today at 10 p.m. when it premieres on the connected television and across the News9 Mediaverse. But coming back to the India-Canada standoff, and a peculiar vector at play that many aren't really talking about. Professor Daudi, foreign policy expert with us on the broadcast. Professor Daudi, for all the students that are there now, I'm going to read out some concerns of parents. My daughter went to Canada to study 7 months ago. My child is also concerned there. She can't focus on her studies. Another parent says, my 2 daughters are in Canada and I'm tense. Governments of both countries should find a solution. Another parent has, a similar sort of a concern. Now, isn't it incumbent on the administration, the Canadian government, to safeguard our students over there? And what is the larger message that is being picked up by the multitude here back at home? We're seeing violent protests. We're seeing, well, this time around not as violent, but we've seen them before. But then again, the idea of anti-India, the idea of being an Indian in Canada today is very different from what it was back in the day. So in that sense, how important is it for the Canadian authorities to restore a sense of confidence in the Indians and especially the student community, the Indian student community on the ground in Canada?
Well, this is what, makes me feel sad about, and I'm also worried like many other parents. I don't live in India. I mean, I'm not there in India right now, but I can see the problems when they live in a different country. And there are problems with these, the mother, nation, the original country they belong to, and the country they are living in. So they are, in fact, having lots of pressure, and they think that what's next coming. When we talk about India-Canada rift, when we have these kinds of issues, problems, we expect the kinds of poor trade, travel, businesses, investments, and in terms of the diaspora, when we have Indians, especially students living in Canada, it's a big number, they are worried. And I think it's the responsibility, mutual responsibility. The governments in general, they should always think about this. But what happens, the one thing that comes to my mind when it comes to anti-India sentiment, the role of Indian government is different here. We have certain principled approach why this is happening. I mean, we believe in having good relationships even with our neighbors who do not think good about us. So we are such kind of people. We believe in Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. That is one earth, one family, okay, and one future. So we do not encourage, we do not invite issues where our own people, own citizens have problems. So it's a serious question. Even I know a couple of Indian friends. They are, I mean, students. They have been trying to get Canadian visas, and they are quite worried because it was almost half the way, and they could not complete the procedure. Now the thing is, like, there should be something. I mean, in the discussion here as well, and those who are listening to us, even maybe the authorities, they should seriously try to work on the areas and the solutions where these issues are solved, and this can be done only if we have proper diplomatic channels and dialogues. I think the proper sense this prevails, and soon the other nations also, the friendly countries, they should interfere and they should try to find proper, diplomatic ways to let these things end at the earliest. But the question is whether the Canadian government at present, with the allegations, are serious, and that's why things are aggravating. Now, as far as the students are concerned, I think this will take a couple of weeks, I believe, and things should go to the normal track, and there should be some sort of windows in diplomacy. They do not completely close everything. So it's a kind of sometimes pressure techniques used by both the countries. Let's see what happens. But I am equally worried about large number of students having these problems in Canada, and of course there are a couple of Canadians also in India, and they have the same issues. Let's see, let's hope for the best.
All right. No, absolutely. Let's hope that good sense prevails. But what's really happening on the ground is a picture in stark contrast. Ambassador Fabian, I just want to pick your, brains on what the Sri Lankan Foreign Minister Ali Sabri, said about terrorists having found safe haven in Canada. And he's not alone. You know what, sir? Matthew Miller, he's come out and said the same thing. We earlier had the Foreign Minister of Australia who'd come out and given a response as well. How about we first listen in to the Sri Lankan High Commissioner, and I'll come back for your opinion on what you think they had to say.
Terrorists have found safe haven in Canada. Canadian Prime Minister has this way of just coming out with some outrageous allegations without any supporting proof. The same thing they did for Sri Lanka, a terrible, total lie about saying that Sri Lanka had a genocide. Everybody knows there was no genocide in our country. And I saw yesterday he had gone and given a rousing welcome to somebody who have associated with the Nazis in the past on the Second World War. So this is questionable, and we have dealt it in the past. We have categorically rejected those outrageous allegations. So I'm not surprised that sometime Prime Minister Trudeau comes out with outrageous, unsubstantiated allegations. Yeah, that has actually affected our relationship. People to people, we have good contact. Foreign Ministry has a different take on that. Ministry of Global Affairs has very clearly said that Sri Lanka did not go through a genocide. Whereas the Prime Minister, as a politician, stand up and says that genocide had taken place. That itself is contradictory to each other. That doesn't help. I don't think anyone should poke their nose into the other countries and tell as to how we should govern our country. Yeah, that's a conversation going on for some period of time. India has expressed its concerns for a long period of time. But we have now come out with the SOP, Standard Operating Procedure. When we were making that, we consulted many of our friends, including India. So as long as that comply with the SOP, we have no problem. But if it doesn't comply with the SOP, we have a problem. So therefore, as far as I know, we have not given the permission to come to Sri Lanka during the month of October. So there are negotiations going on, but Indian security concerns, which are legitimate, are very, very important for us. We have always told that because we want to keep our region as a zone of peace.
what I will say is we are deeply concerned by the allegations referenced by Prime Minister Trudeau. We remain in close contact with our Canadian partners, as the Secretary said on Friday. We believe it's critical that Canada's investigation proceed and that the perpetrators be brought to justice. And we have publicly and privately urged the Indian government to cooperate in the Canadian investigation.
Well, so Ambassador Fabian, that was, of course, the spokesperson for the U.S. Secretary of State. And this just in, I mean, this is what I'm picking up as of now. This is U.S. Ambassador to India, Eric Garcetti, who says that we care about both these countries. Now, you've heard what, of course, you know what the top diplomats from Australia have to say, the top diplomats of Bangladesh. We just heard the Foreign Affairs Minister of Sri Lanka on the same, the U.S. spokesperson for the U.S. Secretary of the State. What's your opinion on this, sir?
Yes, thank you. Well, the audio may be a technical problem at my end. When it started, it was not very clear, but I had heard earlier the Sri Lankan High Commissioners as well as the Sri Lankan Foreign Ministers, what they had to say.
Right.
But before I answer, I just want to very briefly make one point. The distinguished speaker who spoke before me, he made a very important point that what is required is to have a de-escalation, because that travel advisory which Canada issued is what I call a part of tit-for-tat diplomacy. Now, what is required for India and Canada, I repeat, India and Canada, to end this tit-for-tat diplomacy, stop talking at each other through the media, and please appoint a special representative, and these two representatives should meet at a neutral place without the media glare and come out with a formula to be referred to their respective governments in diplomatic language at referendum. That is a correct approach, not escalating. And the Indian students in Canada are worried, not because they are under any threat from the government of Canada or even the white Canadians. They are worried partly because of the advisory given by our Ministry of External Affairs and partly because of the Sikh extremists who have asked the Hindus to get out. So now coming to what you have asked me. Well, Sri Lanka, you know that there are a certain number of Sri Lankans, Tamils, settled in Canada, and they support Tamil Eelam, and they also consider that the Sri Lankan government has violated human rights of the Tamils, and you know that this has been discussed at the United Nations Human Rights Council in Geneva. So these Tamils in Sri Lanka come out with statements from time to time, and the Sri Lankan government has been asking Canada to take action against them, but for reasons I have already explained, Canada cannot take any action against them. And as regards the US statement, I think US will find it difficult to make a choice between India and Canada, but my view is that they will not have to make a choice at all. And as I suggested, if Canada and India now decide to sort of bring down the temperature, well, then we can find a good solution for this rather tricky matter.
Absolutely, Ambassador. You know what? I do want to end it at that particular note where, we're talking about de-escalation, we're talking about what can be done next, not tit-for-tat measures. But Lieutenant General Kulkarni, very quickly, I do want your opinion on this one little aspect, because it's important to note here at the same time that, the Canada's Deputy Army Chief Major General Peter Scott, he's in India. He's going to be part of that Indo-Pacific Army Chiefs Summit. I mean, two pictures in stark contrast, right? At one point, on the diplomatic front, you can't meet each other eye to eye. On the other military front, we're carrying out joint exercises. Very quickly, sir.
Thank you, Kabir. I think it's excellent, because thank God at least the communication is open. we are doing joint exercises, which will definitely greatly help, because the Trudeaus have had difficult relationship with India. Even Mrs. Gandhi, whenever she used to speak to Trudeau's father, giving all input, even after the Babar Khalsa, the ambassador is absolutely right that during the Kanishka thing, he was not the Prime Minister, but enough inputs were being given to what is happening in Canada. Despite the 50 years of long acrimonious kind of relationship that exists between India and Canada, at least for the world at large, for peace for world at large, and to be able to keep China also at bay, to also ensure that the freedom of navigation is there in the Indo-Pacific, these kind of relationships, at least military to military, are very important, and irrespective of whatever it may be, that speaks volume that the world ensures and the world wants peaceful and peace at all, and there is a need to de-escalate the kind of tensions that have cropped up. So better to have this kind of relationship. Of course, when you shake hands, have a drink together, you always find at the end of the day, as you say, all the same cheers, and we carry on moving forward. I think that's very important. We must de-escalate, and this military to military relationship will definitely strengthen India-Canada relationship. Yeah.
All right, we'll leave it at that note. De-escalation is the way to go forward for everybody, for all sectors over here, especially the student community over there. Many thanks, Ambassador. Many thanks, Lieutenant General and Professor Daudi, for joining us here on this particular show with your insightful inputs. Well, ladies and gentlemen, all eyes next on S. Jaishankar's response to Trudeau's allegations at the United Nations General Assembly. What's going to happen next on the ground? Lots more coming right on the other side. This is Kabir Naqvi signing off. Keep watching Newsline Live.
What happened on 8th June 2022? Spokesperson like Sania Mirza or Saina Nehwal, they get written about more than the women's cricketer.
Journalist, for some reason, doesn't like an athlete. The narrative is very different.
Don't you think that a very, very focused approach should be there to create an ecosystem for producing champions?
There are also some girls, they say like, Didi, school में तो कोई नहीं है हमारा, हम खेलना चाहते हैं लेकिन boys team में लेते नहीं है.
In the huddle, do you tell your team members that let's go and fight? Or you tell them, let's go and win?
The purpose of you being in the tournament, that you've come to win.
Duologue with Paruntas featuring Mithali Raj. World premiere on Connected TV. Tonight at 10. Only on Newsline Live. India's first and only digital exclusive English news stream for Connected TV. Supported by Alliance Broadband.
3 years after the deadly Galwan clashes, India has doubled the pace of infrastructure creation on the border. India's Border Road Organization is accomplishing mission impossible, creating infrastructure to secure us from our foes across the Himalayas.
Look at China. They don't have to climb up like us. Once they are on the Tibetan plateau, the construction work, the maintenance work, everything is fairly easy.
On India's 77